In December of 2010, the Bamu children came over to London from Paris to visit their older sister, Magali, and her boyfriend for the holidays. All was well for the first few days, however, things would begin to take a dark turn, and one of the Bamu children would not make it out alive. Today, we are going to be talking about the torture and murder of Kristy Bamu. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. If you are new here, my name is Brandon, and each week we post something true crime, or recently I started doing Reddit stories. So if that sounds interesting to you, subscribe if you're on YouTube, and this episode is also available on Spotify, and as always that will be linked down below. And yeah, let's get into this episode. Before we get started, I wanted to give some content warnings. This case is quite brutal. It's just got a lot of things to do with like crimes against children, like torture, murder of children, of a child, and mentions of an abusive relationship. So if that's something you can't listen to, please click out now. And you can watch my previous video, which is on either my Reddit story or the case of Jordan Davis. And if you're still here, let's get into this case. So, as I said at the beginning, this case takes place in December of 2010. 15-year-old Kristy Bamu and his 4 siblings. A 22-year-old brother named Eves, a 13-year-old younger brother who was autistic, and his 2 sisters, 20-year-old Kelly and an 11-year-old sister. The identities of these 2 younger children have been kept private for reasons of them being underage. So the Bamu family all lived in Paris, but were going to London to visit their older sister Magali, who was 29, and her boyfriend Eric Bakubi, who was 28, and they were going over for the Christmas holidays. Magali Bamu was born on the 21st of February 1983 in Zaire, which is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. She was born to her father Pierre and her mother Jacqueline. She lived the first few years of her life with an aunt and uncle, and then in 1988 the Bamu family moved to Paris to escape the ruling of President Mobutu. In Paris, Pierre opened a carpentry business where he would make and sell furniture. However, the family would move around a lot, but Magali would often be left behind so that she could continue her schooling. In 1996, Pierre actually moved back to Zaire to work on his business, and 13-year-old Magali Bamu was sent to live with her cousin Bibi and her husband Ferdinand in East London. Her life living there, however, was not a very nice one. They treated her as if she was a servant. After finishing her schooling, Magali found a job as a receptionist and later as a dental nurse, and this is when Magali Bamu would meet Eric Bakubi for the first time through a mutual friend. Eric Bakubi was a football coach, and when he met Magali, they get on like a house on fire. The relationship seemed to go off to a good start. However, this would not last for very long. Eric became very controlling of Magali. He would isolate her, wouldn't let her see her friends. He would always want to know where she was. Eric would also call her stupid and weak, and this would really mess with her self-esteem. When you're younger, you can be quite impressionable, and if you're told something enough times, then you start to believe what the person is telling you. Magali would see herself as weak and stupid because Eric had chiselled away at her self-esteem. And to Magali's parents, Eric was perfect. They really liked him, and they let him into the family with open arms. He even called Jacqueline and Pierre mum and dad. They knew absolutely nothing about the way he was treating Magali behind closed doors. I believe that back then, witchcraft was quite a common belief in Zaire, But as Magali was raised in Paris, she didn't really have those sorts of beliefs. However, Eric did. Eric Bakubi was born in Zaire in 1983, which is the same year as Magali. Eric's mother unfortunately died during the birth of Eric, and he always blamed himself for his mother's death, which, of course it wasn't, he was a baby. So Eric was raised by his father, who was a trader in the gold industry. His father, all through Eric's life, taught him about witchcraft, especially Kindoki. The belief of Kindoki originates from the Democratic Republic of Congo, formerly known as Zaire, and Kindoki is believed to cause possession by evil spirits in children. If a child is believed to have Kindoki possession, then some pretty awful steps were taken to free the child from these spirits. This includes things such as exorcisms and beatings and just torturing the poor child. The people believed that the evil spirits would feel all the pain from all the torture because they thought that the evil spirit had taken over the child's body, which obviously the children weren't taken over by spirits. So it was actually the child that was feeling all this pain and not the spirits. The signs of Kindoki possession are things which children do all the time. Simple things such as biting your nails or wetting yourself. A report in 2012 found that there has been a large rise of witchcraft-based child abuse in the UK, and that over the last decade there has been 83 confirmed cases of witchcraft-based abuse, using methods such as exorcisms, beatings, starvation and sleep deprivation. So getting back to the case, Eric Bakubi was a massive believer in Kindoki possession, and he would often give big speeches to Magali, and as I said, she didn't really believe in it, so she just let him rant on. Eric said that he had had visions as a child, and he would also see things around him that other people couldn't. And his family believed that he was possessed by Kindoki. In 1990, when Eric was 7 years old, his uncle took him to London to free the war that was happening in Congo. This uncle would end up dying 10 years later in 2000 from AIDS. However, he also taught Eric about the whole world of Kindoki possession and instilled this belief upon him. Regardless of his upbringing, Eric Bakubi found a passion for football. He would play and he would end up teaching. He became a football coach. In 2004 is when he met Kristy Bamu, and this is when their toxic relationship started. The couple were very on again and off again, and Magali has said that throughout her relationship, his obsession with Kindoki was becoming more and more intense. Eric would move around London a lot because he thought that the spirits were coming into his home and that he needed to try and outrun them. He began spending all of his time praying and meeting with religious leaders and researching. His whole life was basically surrounded by this Kindoki obsession. It got to the point where he believed that his sole purpose was to free the world from evil spirits and that he was sent down to earth by God. He would go around diagnosing people with Kindoki. Magali and Eric had a mutual friend named Naomi Elonga. Naomi came and stayed with the couple in 2008, and when she arrived, Eric began accusing her of bringing Kindoki into his house. As many of us are, Naomi was a nail biter, and this made Eric believe she was possessed. So for 3 days, he starved her, he wouldn't let her sleep, and he would spend the whole day praying for her. Man you, Magali was involved in this, even though she claims to not believe in it. Naomi had very long, beautiful hair, and they cut it all off to about up here, and said that they did this to release the Kindoki spirit from inside of her, which to me makes absolutely no sense at all. Naomi ended up calling someone to come and pick her up, and she got away from the crazy couple. And Magali began to see how crazy this was too. And after Eric had tried to make her eat off the floor like a dog, she refused and he gave her a black eye. Kristy Bamu ended up leaving Eric Bakubi and escaped to a women's refuge where she stayed for the next 3 months. Kristy Bamu ended up leaving Eric Bakubi and escaped to a women's refuge where she stayed for the next 3 months. During this time, Eric was constantly trying to get back with her, trying to manipulate her into it. And unfortunately, after these 3 months in the refuge, she ended up getting back with Eric, and they both moved into Manor House apartment in North London. Eric even proposed to Magali like right after they'd just got back together, and surprisingly she actually accepted this proposal. At Christmas time in 2010 is when all of Magali's siblings were due to come over from Paris to visit her. They were also excited to see their sister and to be in London for the holidays. And they all loved Eric. They all thought of him as their sort of older brother figure. They got on so well, and to add that both Pierre and Jacqueline would not be coming to London with the children due to work commitments, but would be coming to just after Christmas, so on the 27th of December. For the first few days things were all good, everybody was getting along. It was a happy and nice time. However, this began to change when both Magali and Eric began accusing all 5 of the children of being possessed by Kindoki and bringing it into their house. I'm not sure that the kids even knew what Kindoki was. I believe that they were born in Paris, so they wouldn't have even had any idea. So they must have just been very confused. 20-year-old Kelly knew what it was, but even then she didn't believe it in, and she had no interest in it. For the next 3 days, Eric Bakubi and Kristy Bamu tortured the Bamu siblings in the most brutal ways. They would starve them and not give them any water. They would force the siblings to pray constantly. If the siblings ever tried to stand up for themselves, Eric would beat them, and he would ask them constantly if they were possessed by Kindoki, and when they said no, he would further beat them. The Bamu siblings would be begging Eric to stop the torture and saying they weren't possessed, and that they had no idea what he was talking about. But at this point there was no change in his mind. He'd already decided that they were possessed by these evil Kindoki spirits. They would ask their older sister Magali to help them, but she didn't. She allowed the torture to carry on, and she was just as willing as a participant in the attacks. Eventually, 20-year-old Kelly and the 11-year-old sister confessed to Eric and Magali that they were possessed, in hopes to stop their torture, which this did work. However, it didn't work for any of the other siblings. That same night, 15-year-old Kristy Bamu had wet himself because he was so scared of what was happening to him, and he had hidden his underwear. But Eric ended up finding them, and this convinced him that it was Kristy, and Kristy alone, who was the one who was possessed. And from this point on, the torture was focused on him. He had decided that Kristy was the one who had brought Kindoki into his home. He forced the other siblings to participate in the torture of their brother Kristy. At this time, Magali and Eric were redecorating their apartment, and they had some loose tiles, ones that, were yet to be cemented to the floor. And Eric would smash these over Chrissy's head, and he would make his siblings hold him down to the floor while he did this. He would also beat him over the head with a hammer, and either Eric or Magali got a pair of pliers and made 20-year-old Kelly twist Chrissy's ear in them, but because she didn't want to, she wasn't doing it hard at all, so Magali snatched them off of her and twisted Christy's ear in them as hard as she could. Eric got a metal bar and put it into Kristy's mouth, and then he hit this bar with a chisel and a dumbbell, which knocked out pretty much most of his teeth, which would have been very painful for him. For the next few days, 15-year-old Kristy Bamu would be tortured constantly. He would also be attacked with knives that would slash him all over his body, not enough to do any major damage, but enough to cause him pain. After these 3 days of torture, it was found that Kristy had received over 130 separate injuries, and after enduring this abuse, Kristy was pleading with Eric and Magali to just let him die. On the 24th of December, Eric and Magali forced the siblings to clean the apartment up. Of course, there was blood and mess all over the apartment, so he made them clean it up, and he was playing really loud music to stop the neighbours from hearing him screaming at the children. However, a downstairs neighbour could hear all that was going on above them and called the building management, and I have no idea, but for some reason they sent a plumber. I don't know why a plumber was sent to a domestic incident. The police should have been called, but they weren't. Anyway, this plumber was sent to go and see what was going on, and he barely did that because he didn't even knock on the door. He just stood outside the apartment listening. After he went back to the building management, they didn't do anything, which is so annoying because if they had done, I'm sure that the outcome of this case would have been very different. This could have been prevented. But because the plumber didn't... because no one called the police, well, you know what the result is of that. Both Jacqueline and Pierre were still back in Paris and actually been receiving frequent calls from Magali. She would hold a knife to her siblings and make them tell their parents how much of a good time they were having and make up things that they'd been up to. At one point, Eric called the father Pierre, telling him about Kristy being possessed by Kindoki, and that if he didn't come and get him, that he would kill Kristy. At first, he didn't believe that he was being serious. He loved and trusted Eric. He saw him as his just another son, basically. But when he put Kristy on the phone, he believed it, and this is when panic set in for Pierre and Jacqueline. They tried their very best to try and travel to London. They tried to rent a car to drive there, but as it was Christmas Day, everything was unavailable. So all they could do was wait till their original date of the 27th of December, and just hope that Kristy would still be alive by then. But unfortunately, they would be too late. After days of torture, Magali and Eric made all the siblings get into the bathtub and began to hose them down with cold water as part of a cleansing ritual. Kristy Bamu had been so injured and was both physically and mentally drained. And as the bathtub began to fill up, Kristy Bamu's body gave up on him and his head slipped under the water. After a few minutes, 20-year-old Kelly realised that Kristy's head had slipped under the water and alerted Eric, who pulled him out of the bath and began CPR, but unfortunately, 15-year-old Kristy Bamu had drowned to death. Emergency services were called, who came and took him to the hospital, but there was nothing they could do. It was just too late. At 8 PM on Christmas Day, Kelly called her father Pierre, letting him know of Kristy's death. And I just cannot begin to imagine how his parents were feeling, you know. They got a call saying that their daughter's boyfriend was going to kill their son, but there was absolutely nothing that they could do to stop it. And then to get the call that your son is now dead on Christmas Day while you're in another country is just so awful. When the paramedics arrived on scene, there was blood everywhere. All over the walls, there were those smashed tiles covered in blood. Weapons such as hammers and knives were just left out covered in blood, and hair and skin. I wonder what they were thinking, you know. I wonder what they were thinking. They've been told to come to a reported drowning, and then they enter this apartment and there's just blood and bloody weapons all over the place. Of course, at this point is when the police were called, and both Kristy Bamu and Eric Bakubi were arrested for the murder of 15-year-old Kristy Bamu, and also on 2 charges of causing actual bodily harm. Eric pled not guilty to murder but pled guilty to manslaughter and the charges of actual bodily harm on grounds of diminished responsibility due to brain injury. However, this plea was rejected by the courts, so they both went to trial. This case was so bad and all the evidence was so disturbing that Judge David Paget excused the members of the jury from ever having to serve in a jury again, and this case would actually end up being the last case of his career. In Eric's trial, his defence lawyer argued that Eric couldn't be held responsible for his actions due to his culture and his beliefs of Kindoki, a brain injury he had sustained in his childhood, and due to schizophrenia. Magali's defence was that she was being manipulated into it by Eric, and that she didn't even believe in Kindoki, and that she was forced into it. But Kelly testified against her, saying that Magali was complicit in the torture and murder, and she didn't even try to stop it. And she even told Kristy that he had deserved what was happening to him. Judge David Paget accepted Eric Bakubi's claims, but he said, quote, "The belief in witchcraft, however genuine, cannot excuse an assault to another person, let alone the killing of another human being." And then he also rejected Magali's claims and said, quote, "It's only explicable if you shared Eric Bakubi's belief. It provides some explanation for what happened, but it does not excuse it." Eric Bakubi was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years, and Kristy Bamu was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. Kristy's father, Pierre, said this in a statement, quote, "Kristy died in unimaginable circumstances, at the hands of people he loved and trusted. People we all love and trusted. I feel betrayed to know that his own sister Magali did nothing to save him. Makes the pain that much worse." So that is the end of this video. It was quite a brutal one, I know. Please leave down a comment and you'll probably get another video soon, another Reddit story. So if you're enjoying that, give it a like, give this video a like. Again, this video is available on Spotify. I think that's all I have to say, and I will see you next week with another true crime video, and sometime soon with a Reddit story. Okay, bye.